Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Greidick. I'm Dr. Martha Greidick. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. If you've ever experienced being in a state of flow, you know its value. You can feel more productive, more creative, and so much more. But many struggle to get into that state, especially when it comes to achieving the state of flow at the workplace. And despite its benefits, because it can be tricky sometimes, as desirable as getting into the state of flow is, it can also be troublesome for many because of its potential difficulty when it comes to achieving it. But the good news is that there are things that you can do to help yourself get into that state of flow and stay there. First and foremost, and this is kind of an obvious one, but unfortunately, all too often it gets overlooked. The first thing is to minimize or eliminate, if possible, all of your distractions. That seems like a no-brainer, but this gets overlooked all too often. But if you think about it logically, getting into the state of flow or any kind of state of mind, be it simple concentration or focus or creativity, is much more difficult when distractions surround you. So first things first, minimize or even eliminate, if possible, all the distractions around you. That means noises, phones, alerts, emails, people, interruptions, whatever that may be. You know what interactions you have with your environment and which of those interactions are distracting to you. So before you can set out on the adventure of achieving this desired state of flow, first thing to do is to eliminate or at the very least minimize as many of the distractions in your environment as possible. The other thing that's important is to stop multitasking. While many people have begun to understand multitasking for what it truly is, some are still under that assumption or that spell, as I like to call it, that multitasking is a good thing. When it comes to achieving, when it comes to your workplace experience and what you're able to put out with your efforts, multitasking is very counterproductive because you're not really doing two tasks at once, but in reality you are switching back and forth between tasks. The only true multitasking are things such as breathing and blinking and talking at the same time, because you don't have to think about blinking. You don't have to plan it. You don't have to execute it. Your body does it for you. You don't have to think about your breathing. It just happens on its own, which is what allows you to do other things that are more intentional. But when it comes to work, multitasking doesn't really exist in the form that we have been made to believe it exists. So get rid of this idea that multitasking is productive, that it's your friend, or that it truly has any place in your day. And especially when we're talking about aiming to achieve that state of flow, get rid of the idea of multitasking altogether. Don't force it. If you're trying to get into that state of flow, but for whatever reason, you just can't seem to get into it, don't force it, because that just makes it worse. It's like forcing anything. If you can't sleep and you're trying to force it somehow, you just end up being more restless or tossing and turning more. So if you're not feeling it, if you've given it a try, don't force it. Instead, you may want to take a break. That may mean walking away. That may mean doing something else. That may mean taking a break. Whatever that means, take that break from trying to get yourself into that state of flow. If it's not going to happen at this moment, maybe it's not going to happen today. Maybe there's just too much going around in the environment that's distracting. Maybe you have too much on your mind that's distracting. You may need to back off and come back to it later. Make sure to establish clear goals. Whatever you're trying to do, whatever you're trying to accomplish, you're much better off when your goals are well defined and clear. It's the same thing with trying to reach a state, whether it's a state of flow or anything else. If you don't have clear, well-defined goals, you will encounter an unnecessary struggle. But when you do have clear, well-defined goals for what you want to achieve, you're getting into that state of flow, staying in it long enough to achieve those goals is much more likely. So make sure that before you set on that journey, you have clear, well-defined goals as related to your state of flow and what you want to achieve while in that state of mind. Make sure that you balance the challenge and the skill. When your skill outweighs the challenge, you're bored. It's going to be more difficult to get into a state of flow. And when the challenge outweighs your skill, it's going to be a struggle. So flow will be that much more elusive. We want your skills and the challenge that you're facing to be well matched. You don't want things to be too easy. You don't want them to be too hard. You want that Goldilocks balance where you are stretching yourself, but you are also working on things that are achievable, that are doable, that are realistic. So in the end, you are able to achieve and at the same time have a sense of achievement because it wasn't too easy. You had to work for it, but you were able to get what you set out to get, to do what you set out to do. So make sure to pay attention to that balance between challenge and skills. Practice achieving the state of mind, the state of flow outside of the workplace. If the only place that you practice this is at work, when maybe the stakes are higher or the pressure is higher, it's going to be that much more stressful on you. But if you become much more accustomed with trying to achieve that state by practicing it outside of the workplace, you will not only clock in more practice hours, if you will, and therefore get better at it more efficiently and quicker, but you will also be more familiar with the whole concept, so it won't be so scary or foreign to you. So don't forget to practice getting into a state of flow outside of the workplace. And most of you can think of things in your own personal lives or anything else outside of the workplace where you could truly benefit from achieving that state of flow. So make sure you are taking the time to practice getting into flow, not just while you're at work, but also outside of the workplace as well. As you can see, while achieving that desirable state of flow can seem difficult and maybe elusive, as desirable as it is, there are things that you can do to improve your chances. These are simple practices, but they are effective practices. And what that means is the time and effort that you put into it will be reflected in the results that you get. As this episode comes to an end, let's reflect on what was discussed here. Being in a state of flow can be very beneficial, especially when we're talking about our workplace experiences. You can become more productive, more focused, more creative, and there's so much more to benefit from reaching that state. But it can be a little bit difficult for some people, maybe a lot difficult for others. The good news is that there are plenty of things that you can do to improve your chances of getting yourself into that state of flow and staying there. Things that are simple but often overlooked are practices such as getting rid of distractions and forgoing the idea of multitasking. Those can really trip you up. So make sure you get rid of distractions and give up the idea of multitasking when you set out on a journey to reach that state of flow. Don't force it. Sometimes you're just not meant to get into that state of flow, whether it's the busyness of the environment around you, or maybe your own mind is focused on other things that can be distracting. Don't force it. Take a break when you need to and let it happen more naturally, more organically, and you will be much more successful and happier for it when you attempt to get yourself into that state of flow. Make sure that you have clearly defined, well-set goals before you start trying to get into that state of flow, and match the challenge level with your skill level so that whatever you're trying to achieve is neither too easy nor too difficult. And of course, practice makes better, which makes it that much more important that you practice getting yourself into that state of flow, not only while you're at work, but also outside of the workplace. As with anything else, the more time and effort you put into it, the better results you are likely to get. Does that mean that achieving this state of flow will be effortless for you? For some, yes. For others, not so much. And some days will be better than others because you don't exist in a bubble. Not only do you have an environment and distractions around you to deal with, but you also have your own mind to contend with. Sometimes your mind is focused on other things. But give yourself the time and the chance to practice getting this into that state of flow, and you will see that before you know it, you will reap the benefits of reaching this state of mind. As the week unfolds, I invite you to try getting yourself into that state of flow. If you've never experienced it, it's almost magical once you're there. So you will understand the benefit and the enjoyment of reaching that state of mind. Practice. Talk to other people. See what their own experiences are like. Have other people around you, whether that's at work or in your personal life, achieved flow. What was it like for them? How were they able to get to that state? And practice the suggestions that were mentioned in this episode so that you make it easier for yourself. Give yourself some time, be gentle with yourself, and understand that the more you practice, the better you will be at achieving flow, and then you can reap the many benefits that come along with this almost magical state of mind. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I invite you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of this podcast. The link for that is in the description below. In addition to the video version of the podcast, my YouTube channel also contains videos that focus on stress management. So I invite you to check that out. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.